Is this a Western?
Greetings. So this week I'm going to try to address three separate suggestions that came in by email. They all fall under what we might call Arthouse films, films that strive to transcend mere entertainment value and often they want to challenge their audience into active viewing. And these tend to reach relatively small audiences, but that perhaps have more staying power for those audiences than many blockbuster films that do. And the West and the Western are not usually associated with such highfalutin cinema. We're common folk, even Philistines out here. But hold your horses. We're not totally divorced from the world of high culture. So let's take these films in turn. First, Ben Flanagan sent in the suggestion of Jean Dillman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. I hope I got that right. Excuse my French. The 1975 classic Belgian film by Chantal Akerman. Gary Canone sent in El Ángel Exterminador, or The Exterminating Angel, the 1962 Mexican-Spanish film by Luis Buñuel. And David Cartwright suggested, he's our Board of Trustees chair, the Autry, suggested the Last Black Man in San Francisco, an indie film from last year by Jimmy Fails and Joe Talbot. All of these share a challenge to the definition of the Western because, well, not because two of them are from outside the United States, but really because their most evocative action takes place indoors, in a one-bedroom Brussels apartment for nearly all of the 3 hours and 20 minutes of Jean Dillman, in an ornate drawing room in a Spanish mansion in Exterminating Angel, and a lovely Victorian house in The Last Black Man. Yet Westerns, too, have explored confined settings, despite the landscapes for which the genre is most famous. Watching Jean Dillman, I thought, perhaps this is heresy, of the Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Of course, Chantal Akerman was a pioneering feminist filmmaker, and Wilder was a kind of pioneering libertarian writer. And Jean Dillman is definitely not kidlit. But the long, patient scenes of potato peeling or making coffee called to mind the meticulous home economics shown in Little House series. Of pioneer writers, Willa Cather probably better captured the despair or the rage or violence that might hum in the background of such grinding experiences of domestic work, usually women's work. But the process of drying meat or making meals is a crucial part of any society, including those societies shown in Westerns. And women's experiences, though only sometimes featured in classic Westerns and rarely as profoundly as in Jean Dillman, are crucial to any rounded storytelling. Now, The Exterminating Angel unfolds in a drawing room or a music room in a mansion where fancy people have come after the dinner party and inexplicably cannot leave, or maybe they can't bring themselves to leave. These elites shed their quote-unquote civilization, a bit like the privileged boys in The Lord of the Flies, and this carries a negative valence in the film, an allegorical condemnation of the elite classes. A similar process of roughening often occurs in historical narratives about the American West, in which Euro-Americans, some of them upper-class people, move to the West and get calluses on their hands and slaughter and cook their own meat. Think of Theodore Roosevelt, the sickly elite boy who spent a short time in North Dakota and came back a Rough Rider. He was supportive of the crimes that accompanied taking that land where he was, and in narratives of American Western history, most famously in the historian Frederick Jackson Turner's Frontier thesis, that roughening or corrosion of civilization was the basis for America's exceptional hustle, its unique national character. It rejuvenated the nation and kept it from being too much like Europe. That account of American history is suspect as history, but the attraction to that kind of story is fascinating, as opposed to Buñuel's revulsion at the sort of falling apart at the seams. But could these people have been having an ennobling experience? Will they come out better for it? The sort of Roosevelt-style narrative? Who knows? So The Last Black Man in San Francisco actually takes place in the West, right? But is it merely a small W Western, a regional Western? The characters Jimmy Fails and Mont Ellen take up residence in a gorgeous Victorian house that Fails says his grandfather built. And in a sense, they are like the guests in Exterminating Angel, settling in an ornate but strange residence outside their ordinary experience. It's a far more hopeful occupation in this case, but it turns out they're outlaws there, making a beautiful kind of last stand as African Americans in a swelling tide of gentrification in San Francisco. The movie echoes the narrative of American Indians, as the street preacher in the movie talks about the final frontier of manifest destiny as Jimmy and Mont ride their skateboard along the waterfront. The historian Jean O'Brien has identified the romance of lasting, which she calls lasting, in which non-native people make much of the last Indian, quote unquote, of any given tribe. And in the West, the fascination that non-natives have had with Ishi, the survivor from the Yahi people, or a kind of last rebel like Geronimo, tries to kind of close the book on native claims to the land, even as it romanticizes in a kind of what another scholar has called imperialist nostalgia. The complicated story of this San Francisco house in Last Black Man and who belongs there does certainly have echoes, and self-consciously so, with the epic stories of the American West. In all three of the films, the confined space of the domestic dwelling becomes a kind of allegory for broader human struggles, both personal and political. In the same way, the frontier settings of some of the best Westerns serve as metaphorical settings for the same sorts of stories. They explore the themes from women's experiences to the way civilization's high gloss wears away for better or worse, to the process of whole populations losing most of their homeland to others. I'm not going to offer a verdict this time. I'm only going to imagine that I'm able to sip some espresso at the sidewalk boulangerie with you all as we discourse on and on until the table turns into a campfire and the coffee still has the grounds in it in a tin pot and we realize that it's always a Western.